Well, hello there, welcome back. Today I'm here with part 3 of my Hunger Games vlog series. During the month of October, I did my annual reread of the Hunger Games, the first book in the series. And I vlogged my entire experience and I really wanted to share it with you. But since there was so much footage, I decided to split this vlog into 3 parts, one for each part of the book. And this video you're watching is actually part 3. I'm gonna link parts 1 and 2 down below and I suggest you check them out first. And before we get into it, I just want to remind you that there's gonna be spoilers in this video, so spoiler warning. This is the final part of the vlog series and I really hope you enjoy it. Okay, so I just finished reading the feast scene and it's official. The movie is way too sanitized. I feel like you don't really get the extent of the horror of the games through the movies, you know? I don't know, man. The feast scene in the book is so fucking gritty and so bloody. Thresh and Katniss have an entire conversation with the sound of a dying girl as background noise, you know? She is moaning as she dies the entire time. And Katniss can barely see a thing because the wound in her eyebrow won't stop bleeding. And if you ever had a head wound, you know that it bleeds so fucking much, you know? The tiniest head wound will bleed non-stop. And this was a gash from a knife. So I also find this scene to be quite interesting for 2 main reasons. One is that I feel like it kind of humanizes the careers in a way, you know. In one moment, Clove is putting on a show and saying those awful things and torturing Katniss in a way. The very next moment, she is almost humanized because she's so fucking scared and she's calling out for Kato for dear life. And he answers, he calls her back and Katniss says that she hears the desperation in his voice, you know, and when he sees Clove laying in the ground dying, that he sounds emotional in a way and she hears him begging Clove to stay with him. I mean, that's humanizing, you know? And I think it really drives home the fact that the real enemy is not the careers, it's the Capito, you know? Because the careers were literally trained their entire lives with the games as a goal. Not only that, but also understanding that they have to put on a show. The other reason that I find this scene so interesting is Thresh. Upon this reread, I really got the sense that he was not willing to play by the Capito's rules. Like, he was forced to play the games, okay, but he's not gonna play by the rules. When Katniss is talking about the interviews at the beginning of the book, she says that Thresh doesn't answer many of the questions, like, he just refuses to answer. He doesn't say anything. And to the questions that he does answer, he only answers with yes or no. And sure, that might be part of his strategy, you know, since he's just this huge strong guy. But I think when you pair that with the other little clues that we get about him, it really makes it seem like he just really doesn't want to play into what the Capito wants from him. And in this scene, you know, the feast, you see that one, he put on weight during the games, which none of the other tributes seem to have done. 2, he doesn't use weapons. He doesn't have any weapons, he only uses a rock. That's his weapon. Like, he didn't get any of the Capito's weapons. And the fact that he's so enraged by Rue's death and he kills Clove more to avenge her than anything else, at least from the looks of it. And so he avenges Rue by killing Clove, and then he lets Katniss go because she was Rue's ally and she took care of Rue. And she didn't leave her side, and he avenged her as well. Which is just so fucking interesting because, one, his morals are quite similar to Katniss's, in the sense of not wanting to owe people things, and also of feeling indebted to them when they do anything for you or for one of your people. That's very interesting. But also because you don't let the enemy go, you know? In this competition, where the only way you can get out alive is by killing everyone else, you don't let a person run when you have the chance to kill them. And he didn't care about that. He said, okay, this one time I'll let you go because you stayed with the little girl, okay? So you can go now. And it really seems like he either didn't kill anyone or he killed very few people up until this point. It definitely comes across that way. And like, he spent the majority of the games, or all of the games, I don't know, in those feuds that Katniss doesn't know what they are and all that. And he was there alone. I really, really like how Susan Collins gives you these hints that there is more to a character than what meets the eye, I guess. Like, she has this way of making even the most insignificant of characters seem like they are a lot more, even if we don't know because Katniss doesn't know. She does this with Madge, she does this with Cena, she does this with Thresh and Foxface, you know. You really get a sense that these are complex people, you know, and multi-dimensional people, even though you don't get to see that and experience that because Katniss doesn't. I feel like I'm not making any sense, but I hope you understood. I am feeling very emotional and nothing really happened, by the way. It's just that you can really start to see the strain on Katniss and Peeta's mental health, you know. You can really start sensing them kind of spiraling and how, you know, it's just getting to them and they are getting tired of this, you know. They are so fucking done with it. Ah, man, this hurts. I just want to protect them. I just read this bit that really got to me. It's funny how different things get to me at every reread. Katniss has been having conflicting feelings in regards to Thresh for a while now. Like, she doesn't want him to die because he seems like a decent person and she really admires him and all that. But she knows he has to die in order for her to win and go back home. So she spends most of the time wishing someone else would kill him so that she won't have to, but she also doesn't want anyone to kill him. It's kind of like the same thing that she was feeling for Rue before and for Peeta before the Rue change. And so she's talking to Peeta about Thresh and saying that she likes him and she feels like if they met back in District 12, they would really be friends. And Peeta says, yeah, well, so let's hope that someone else kills him before we have to, right? And then there's this moment, I'm just gonna read it to you because it really got to me. I don't want Kato to kill Thresh at all. I don't want anyone else to die. But this is absolutely not the kind of thing the victors go around saying in the arena. Despite my best efforts, I can feel tears starting to pull in my eyes. Peeta looks at me in concern. What is it? Are you in a lot of pain? I give him another answer because it is equally true, but can be taken as a brief moment of weakness instead of a terminal one. I want to go home, Peeta, I say plaintively, like a small child. You will. I promise, he says and bends over to give me a kiss. I want to go home now, I say. This shit hits really different when you're an adult. I find it incredibly interesting that she says that she doesn't want anyone else to die, and that includes Kato. Like, it's gotten to a point where she's seen so much death, she doesn't even want Kato to die. She wants no one else to die. You don't come back from this type of damage. This is trauma. And she's 16. They are both 16. Like, oh my god, I can't imagine the trauma. So Thresh just died, and I find Katniss's reaction to it so fucking heartbreaking. How at first she is in denial about it and she doesn't really want to believe it and she wants to see for herself. And I think her inner monologue when she sees the picture is very impactful in a way, even though it's quite simple. I push him away from the rocks and squint out into the dark, rainy sky. For about 10 seconds, I catch a distorted glimpse of Thresh's picture, and then he's gone. Just like that. I don't know what about this line makes it so emotionally charged. I guess it's because it really drives home the fact that all of these deaths are so irrelevant and so fleeting in the grand scheme of things, you know. Like, every single year there's gonna be 23 kids dead, at least, you know, televised, and then no one else is gonna remember them. They're gonna be gone forever, and it's just so fucking sad. And it's really heartbreaking to see how Katniss feels like shit because she didn't want him to die, but also that she's so confused by all of these feelings, you know, and she knows that she can't really show these feelings, you know, because they might make her seem weak in the long term. You know, because it's one thing for her to cry about Rue's death, because they were allies and Rue was a child, but Thresh was just a very powerful and strong enemy. Like, their psychological is just getting worse by the minute. And I know I'm saying a lot of obvious shit here, but like, the emotions here are so raw. You can see the seeds of the trauma, you know, and it's heartbreaking. Wow. I know my room's a mess and so is my hair, but please bear with me. I was gonna update you only when I finish reading the book, because I'm reading part 3 right now and that's the last part. But I have so much to say already, so let's get into it. I find it fascinating that Katniss's father is still very much a presence in her life, despite the fact that he's been dead for what, 6 years? No, 4 years? I'm not sure, I don't remember. For me, this is very evident, especially when she's talking about the birds and hunting and all that, how she considers it not only a necessity anymore, but also the woods are the place where she is genuinely happy and she finds peace. And that is the place that she used to share with her father and that she now shares with Gale, who she met during a very difficult time in her life, the time after her father died and she had to start providing for her family. And Gale was going through that same situation, and the two of them kind of relied on each other and supported each other and helped each other, you know, when no one else was there for them. She and Gale were thrown together by necessity, you know, and eventually the relationship blossomed and became something else, you know, a friendship, but more than that too. She says that he is her confidant and being in the woods with him, she is actually happy at times. And also that it's so much easier, you know, to hunt when you don't have to keep looking over your shoulder all the time and protecting yourself all the time. Hunting is an activity that she used to share with him. Singing was an activity that she used to share with him. The woods were a place she used to share with him. The bows that she uses to hunt, the clothes she uses to hunt, all of that came from her father. And I really like how when Peeta is talking about the first time he noticed her, you know, in the music assembly, how when she sang, all of the birds stopped singing and they started listening just like they did to her father. And I found it very interesting that at that time she kind of comes to this realization that perhaps she has been dismissing music all this time, not because she thinks it's kind of a futile thing and a stupid thing, but because it hurts her too much, you know, because it reminds her of her father. She dismissed it as a defense mechanism, you know, because doing that brought her too close to her father who she didn't have anymore, and that just hurt too much. And similarly to that, with her father's death also came her mother's abandonment, you know, her mother's illness that kind of drove her away from her children, which, as I said before, was a very traumatic event, you know, even though Katniss knows that her mother was ill and that she didn't really have much control over what was happening at the time. She was also traumatized, you know, she was pushed to become the sole provider for her family when she was 12 years old, you know, and the trauma from that doesn't go away just because she knows it wasn't her mother's fault. After the Tracker-Jacker attack, Katniss spends a few days, I think 2 days, out of it, you know, completely blacked out and hallucinating. And the things that she hallucinates about are her mother being far away, you know, and just out of it and just, you know, abandoning them again. Prim starving to death, Prim dying, Prim suffering, and her father's death, you know, the mines blowing up and all that. So these are the things that she's the most afraid of, you know, these are her deepest wounds, and they still inform all of her relationships in a way, you know. The trauma lingers even after she starts to understand it a bit more, even after she understands what happened to her mother in a rational way, the trauma lingers. And the dream she has after the feast as well, when she thinks that she's just laying in bed at home in District 12 and that she is allowed to stay in bed after her time because she feels like she might have a flu, she feels a bit sick, and she feels Peeta caressing her hair and she thinks that it's her mother, and she says something along the lines of she feels her mother's fingers running swiftly through her hair, and she pretends to still be asleep because she craves this contact and she really misses this type of contact from her mother. And if she was well and if she was awake, she would never allow her mother to do that to her. But in that moment she does, you know, she needs it, she craves it. And it really reminded me of this other moment earlier on in the book. It's when her mother and Prim are saying goodbye to her in the Justice Building, and there's this moment where she screams with her mother that her mother can't disappear again. And she says that in that scream was all the rage and all the anger that she felt over the abandonment all these years that she never allowed herself to let out, and how she resented her mother for abandoning her, even though she understood why that happened in a way, in a rational way. And I also really like the fact that Katniss says that she's never been in love before, so she's a bit confused on how to pretend to be in love with Peeta. I find it really interesting that the way she found to fix that was to kind of try to imitate the behavior of her parents. Her idea of what true love looks like is the relationship that her parents had. You know, how her mother's face lit up when her father walked into the room, and how her mother left everything, all of her privilege, all that she had in life to be with her father, and how she almost stopped living after he died. But also all of the tender and intimate moments that they shared, you know, like when he kissed her hand and all of these very tender gestures. So she tries to emulate that behavior in a way, and she also kind of sees it in some of Peeta's gestures as well. And I also found it really interesting how some of Peeta's gestures reminded her of her parents, both as a couple and as individual people as well. Like when he kisses her hand, and she is reminded of times where her father did that to her mother, and she wonders where Peeta picked it up, because the relationship between his parents doesn't seem to be all that loving and tender, and his stroking her hair until she falls asleep, you know, and how that seems comforting and natural, like all of the other kisses and caresses that they share up until that point. And this is more of a connection that I personally traced, you know, this wasn't pointed out by Katniss herself, but she talks about how comforting that is and how she doesn't really want him to stop, and he doesn't. And she falls asleep with him running his hands through her hair. It just really strikes me as something that a mother does to a child, you know, and something that again connects to the dream that she has of her mother running her fingers through her hair and all that. And another connection that I personally traced, that might just be me over-analysing this book to bits, but okay. After she wakes up, you know, after the feast, she realizes that her head injury has been bandaged, that Peeta bandaged it, and she feels just taken aback by that. She says that that simple gesture left her weak and dizzy, and I really thought back to the fact that her mother is a healer and her mother is the person who takes care of wounds, and Peeta did that for her. Am I reaching? Am I grasping at straws? Probably. And on the topic of Peeta, I have so much to talk about in regards to him. I just stopped reading right after Foxface died. I really like that moment because Katniss and Peeta had agreed on a whistle to kind of show the other that they were doing fine. And so she whistles and he doesn't whistle back, and she runs back like worried sick and thinking that he was in trouble, or that Cato got to him, or that he was about to die or something like that. And she's just absolutely terrified out of her mind, and she just doesn't want Peeta to die. And so she goes back and she finds Peeta, and he is absolutely fine. And she's still very filled with adrenaline and the fear that she had moments ago. And she is thankful that he's doing fine, but at the same time, she did not sign up for this. You know, she didn't sign up for this fear of losing someone. She didn't sign up to caring about this boy so much and to not be wanting to be left alone in the arena again. She didn't sign up for any of this. And so her fear comes out as anger and frustration. And also, going back a bit to the very beginning of part 3 and the very end of part 2, she literally cannot stop herself from calling out his name after the rule change is announced. Like, she doesn't even think about it, you know, she is unable to stop herself. It's just kind of like an impulse. She calls out his name. And not only that, but as she is thinking about Peeta, and she suddenly comes to the realization that he was never any danger to her, she cannot keep herself from smiling, which I find adorable. But yeah, anyway, Katniss is such a smart character, you know, because at all times she stops for a moment and thinks about the reaction of the audience and what she ought to show to the audience, you know. And at this moment, for example, when she smiles as she realizes that Peeta was never any danger to her, she doesn't do it for the audience, but she thinks, wow, the audience would really like to see this. And so she kind of shows her face so that the cameras can catch her, even though she didn't do it for the audience. She knew how to use it to her advantage. We see that for the opposite as well, you know, when she is feeling things that she knows are not going to be good for her image in the Capitol, she kind of hides away, you know, she hides her feelings or she hides her face. And there are many moments where she is just very confused about the way she's feeling, or she wants to explore certain feelings that she is experiencing at the moment, but she doesn't want anyone to see it. You know, she's just so frustrated because this doesn't belong to these people, you know, this belongs to her. And she feels really intruded, you know, and invaded in a way. And she keeps thinking about how angry she is with the fact that so many people are seeing this and she doesn't want them to. But going back to Peeta and Katniss's relationship with him, I really think that Katniss is demisexual. The more I read this book, the more I come to that conclusion, you know, or at least somewhere in the ace spectrum. I really started thinking about that again. Because of her discomfort with nakedness, but also because she says that she doesn't really feel anything while she's kissing Peeta most of the time, you know, and he is the first boy that she kissed, and he is a boy that she sees as attractive. She doesn't feel anything until the moment where they are both of them 100% okay, you know, when 100% there. And coincidentally, it's also right after the moment she realizes that she actually cares for him and that she doesn't want to lose him. It feels to me like she is only experiencing this genuine sexual attraction after she starts caring for him. Up until that point, she didn't want Peeta to die, but it wasn't necessarily because she cared for him as a person. She knew that he was a good person and she liked him and all that, but it was more that she didn't want a good person to die. And it was also about how she'd be perceived back home if she chose to not team up with him. And also, it was the right thing to do, you know, in regards to her morals and all that, and especially considering that she was indebted to him in her mind. And also, she says this herself, she is terrified that Peeta's gonna die and she's gonna be left alone in the arena again. But at that moment, it wasn't just that anymore. Now she actually cared for him as a person, as Peeta Malark, you know, she actually liked him and cared for him, and she didn't want to lose him. She wants him to live and she cares for him and she doesn't want to lose him. Talk about slow burn, okay? This fucking romantic relationship takes forever to happen, okay? And I love that. And I also love the fact that they literally never spoke before. You know, the first time they talked to each other is at the train going to the Capitol. All this time, they literally never spoke to each other, and still they were in each other's hands. And for vastly different reasons too. You know, for Katniss, it was the bread incident and how Peeta essentially saved her life and gave her hope, you know, and reminded her of things that she could do in order to survive. And for him, it was the whole music assembly episode, you know, and the story that his father told him about Katniss's father. And I really like the fact too that he says that he noticed just about every other girl, but she was the only one who made a lasting impression, because for me it implies that he actually has been with other girls too, and I really like that. You know, I think that's quite realistic. And on the topic of the singing assembly, the music assembly, you know, that class that they had when they were little, I loved that story so much. You know, the story that Peeta told Katniss. I absolutely love that. And I love the glimpses that it gives into the parents, you know, because I am a nosy bitch. But not only that, it also makes Peter's father's behavior at the beginning of the book make a lot more sense. And it really goes back to what I was saying before. I think I was talking about Thresh, but how Susan Collins is very good at giving you glimpses that these characters have a lot more to them, you know, that they are full people, even though we don't get to see that. Okay, I had to get out of my sweatshirt because it was getting pretty fucking hot, but let's get back into it. Katniss is starting to get a little lost on the role she's playing. She's not quite sure of what is real and what isn't anymore, and this is the first time that she starts suspecting that maybe Peter's feelings for her are true. She's once again very conflicted and very confused about her feelings, and like she cares for him, yes, but she doesn't love him like she's pretending to. And she really doesn't want the whole country to be watching as she tries to make sense of what she's feeling. And she knows that she's gonna have to pretend to be in love with him, you know, even if he is actually in love with her. Like, if he has feelings for her for real, she doesn't have them for him. And she's gonna have to pretend that she does, even though that might hurt him in the future. And that is hurting her right now. There's also this one bit where Katniss is looking at the moon and the moon is full, and she is wondering if this is the real moon, you know, the same moon that she sees at home. And it goes like this. For some reason, I badly want it to be my moon, the same one I see from the woods around District 12. That will give me something to cling to in the surreal world of the arena, where the authenticity of everything is to be doubted. And like, literally, the authenticity of everything is to be doubted. Even her feelings, even her relationship with Peter. And again, she cannot tell what is real and what isn't at times. And she is clinging to him in a similar manner, you know, because he is something from home, you know, he is something familiar. And there's even this bit where Katniss is thinking about the future, and she is thinking of what will Peter become, you know, after the games, and with all of the trauma that they experience in the games, and what is the relationship between the two of them gonna be. And I really wanted to read that paragraph to you because I think it's very interesting. The sun eventually rises, its light slipping through the cracks and illuminating Peter's face. Who will he transform into if he make it home? This perplexing, good-natured boy who can spin out lies so convincingly that Herlif Bannon believes him to be hopelessly in love with me, and I'll admit it. There are moments when he makes me believe in myself. Who is he gonna be? You know, is he still gonna be this sweet, good-natured boy? Or is he gonna be something else entirely? And what's gonna be of them? And I love the fact that she comes to the conclusion that regardless of what happens, he will still be the boy who gave her hope and who saved her life. And she will still be the person who saved his life as well. And nothing will change what they went through in the arena. There's nothing really that can break this bond that comes from shared trauma, you know. At least we'll be friends, I think. Nothing will change the fact that we saved each other's lives in here. And beyond that, he will always be the boy with the bread. Good friends. Anything beyond that, though, and I feel Gale's grey eyes watching me, watching Peter, all the way from District 12. Discomfort causes me to move. I want to preface this by saying that I do not ship Katniss and Gale, but I do understand their relationship, and I think it's a very well-developed and very important relationship, and I really like it and appreciate it in a way. At the beginning of the book, Katniss says that friend doesn't seem to be a strong enough word to describe what Gale is for her, and she talks about how lately the feelings have been changing, you know, when the relationship has been changing in a way. You know, there are moments in the book where she wonders what Gale was making of all the kissing, you know, whether whether he wants Peeta to come back alive to District 12 or not. And, you know, would Gale want to be my boyfriend if I ever open the door? And she talks about how she is never going to marry. And, you know, he will eventually have a family probably, and he will eventually marry someone. But she doesn't say that she doesn't want to be with him. She only says that she doesn't want to get married, and that's why nothing's ever going to happen between the two of them. So I think it's quite naive, you know, to pretend that there was never anything between Katniss and Gale, or that she never wanted anything with him, because it's just blatantly false. You know, the text says otherwise. So like, and I really like how while Katniss is thinking about the future, she's kind of confronted with the fact that she doesn't really know who she is, you know, because so much of her time has been devoted to providing for her family and to the acquisition of food, that when she stops to think about the prospect of not having to hunt anymore and not having to get food anymore, she doesn't know what she would do with her life, and she doesn't really know who she is, you know, because so much of her identity is tied to being the sole provider for her family. I think that's a very important thing to be discussed here, because sometimes it's hard not to let your trauma define you, you know, because you spend so much time having to deal with the consequences of it that it's hard to think of yourself outside of that. But more than that, we go back to the fact that the woods are her safe space, you know, the space where she is happy, the space where she finds peace, the space that she used to share with her father, with the activities that she used to share with her father, and the space that she now shares with her best friend, and, you know, with the things that she does with her best friend as well. And she also thinks of Haymitch and what his life became after the games, how he lives alone, he doesn't have wife, he doesn't have children, and he spends every waking hour drunk, and how all of that money could not save him. And she's terrified of ending up like Haymitch, you know, and she tries to convince herself that that's not going to happen because she isn't alone, you know, but then she starts thinking about how eventually she's going to be alone. You know, eventually Prim is going to get a life of her own, you know, she's going to get married, she's going to have kids, and her mother is going to pass away. And so she is going to be alone, you know, because she will not allow herself to get that same life as Prim is probably going to get. You know, she won't ever allow herself to get married. She won't ever allow herself to have kids. And I really like the fact that she makes it clear from the start that she doesn't want kids, not because she actually doesn't want them necessarily, but because she promised herself that she's never gonna put a child in a world where the Hunger Games exist, you know, because she promised that before she even went into the Hunger Games, because she just doesn't want to have a child that is gonna be raped, you know, that is gonna suffer through all this shit. But, you know, even after she's in the game, she says that there's one thing being evicted doesn't ensure, and that is the safety of your children. You know, your children's names end up in the ripping balls just like everyone else's. And also, at the end of the day, Katniss is a lot like Haymitch in general, so I think it makes sense for her to be scared of becoming him after the games. Peeta himself says that the reason why Katniss and Haymitch can't stand each other is probably because they are too much alike, which becomes quite evident by the fact that she seems to understand every single subliminal message that he sends her, and Peeta seems oblivious to all of it. But despite all of the animosity that they may have for each other, they clearly do care for each other. You know, he keeps himself sober enough to try to keep her alive, and, you know, he sends her messages and he tries to help her along, and she constantly thinks back to him, you know, when wonders how he's doing, and wonders how he's doing with the drinking and with the stress of having to keep her and Peeta alive, and trying to understand him. You know, she thinks back to him more and more as time goes by, and with more and more understanding, and she starts wondering about his past, and she starts thinking and wondering about what he was before he became a addict. You know, she thinks about how he probably tried to help the tributes at first until the point where it got unbearable, and, you know, helping 2 tributes every single year just to watch them die, you know, time and time again, year after year after year. And, you know, it gets to a point when it's unbearable, and he had to start drinking himself to a stupor. And when you pair all that with all the trauma from the games, and, you know, from the fact that his loved loved ones were taken from him after the games. And the fact that he was doing all the mentoring all alone while most people had partners to share the burden with. And boom, it's a recipe for disaster. Haymitch is one of my favorite characters. I think he's so incredibly complex and there's so much more to him. You know, I adore his relationship with Katniss and I adore his relationship with Peeta and how the two are just completely different. And thinking about all that really makes her understand him a lot more and look at him with a new kind of fondness in a way. But also it reminds her that if she gets out alive of the arena, this is going to be her job in the future. She's going to mentor the Go Tribute from District 12. And the thought is so abhorrent, so horrific to her that she has to push the thought out of her head immediately, because if she gives into thinking about it, she will not handle it. And I find it so intriguing that even though her relationship with Haymitch is mostly built up from a distance, it's still very realistic and it's still very strong. It is no less meaningful because it happens from a distance, you know. I talked for way too long. I have so much to say and I love this book. I adore this book. It's just so poignant, you know, when it has so many important topics and so many interesting discussions. It is really a lot deeper than a lot of people give it credit for. You know, I feel like a lot of people dismiss the Hunger Games because it's YA, and which is just kind of stupid in general, you know, just dismissing something because it's YA. But you know, this book has a lot going on. Me? I everything. This last bit, like the final showdown between Cato and Peeta and Katniss was so horrifying. I'm gonna need to collect my thoughts to talk about it in depth. But I think in this last bit of the book you really start getting a sense of how fucking deep the trauma that these characters have from the games is gonna be. When Cato falls to the ground, you know, to the mats, falls off the cornucopia, and Katniss and Peeta are left up there, they are just kind of spending the hours waiting for him to die already, waiting for the meds to finish him off. It never ends. It's a psychological torture, you know. The temperature is just dropping and dropping and dropping, and the cold is, you know, something that would already drive them to madness normally, but under these conditions it's even worse because they spend the entire night hearing this boy die in the most gruesome way possible. And, you know, you add to that the fact that Peeta is also dying, you know, slowly due to blood loss, and Katniss is terrified that he might slip away at any moment. Don't go to sleep, I tell him. I'm not sure if this is exactly medical protocol, but I'm terrified that if it drifts off, you'll never wake again. The next hours are the worst in my life, which if you think about it, is saying something. The code would be torture enough, but the real nightmare is listening to Cato moaning, begging, and finally just whimpering as the muds work away at him. After a very short time, I don't care who he is or what he's done, all I want is for his suffering to end. It goes on and on and on, and eventually completely consumes my mind, blocking out memories and hopes of tomorrow, erasing everything but the present, which I begin to believe will never change. There will never be anything but cold and fear and the agonized sounds of the boy dying in the hole. Peeta begins to doze off now, and each time he does, I find myself yelling his name louder and louder, because if he goes and dies on me now, I know we'll go completely insane. He's fighting it, probably more for me than for him, but it's hard because unconsciousness would be its own form of escape. But the adrenaline pumping through my body would never allow me to follow him, so I can't let him go. I just can't. And then referring to Cato, there's this. If he's near the mouth, I may be able to take him out. We will be an act of mercy at this point. It takes a few moments to find Kato in the dim light in the blood. Then, the raw hunk of meat that used to be my enemy makes a sound, and I know where his mouth is. And I think the word he's trying to say is, please. Pity, not vengeance, sends my arrow flying into his skull. And then the moment they announce that the route change has been revoked, Katniss's first thought is, of course, how much of a fool could I be to fall for this? This was clearly just them trying to get the most dramatic Hunger Games of all time. Peeta kind of says something along the lines of, well, if you think about it, it makes sense. And he goes to take his knife out of his belt to discard it. But Katniss is so on alert, I guess, and so in a frenzy because of the games. And she's kind of not all there. Both of them are not all there. And so she sees him going for the knife and she thinks that he's going to kill her. And she takes her last arrow and points at his heart. And then when she realizes that he has dropped the knife into the lake, she's taken by this overwhelming shame, to have even thought that he was going to do that. And to be so quick, to point her arrow at his heart and try to kill him. And she's taken over by shame and she throws the weapons to the ground. And he tries to convince her, to kill him, that he wants her to make it out alive since the both of them cannot. So he tries to convince her to do it. And she's adamant on not doing it. And I think it's very interesting what she says. Do it before they send those meds back or something. I don't want to die like Kato, he says. Then you shoot me, I say furiously, shoving the weapons back at him. You shoot me and go home and live with it. And as I say it, I know that death right here, right now, will be the easier of the two. And so Peeta's like, okay, I'm gonna die first anyway because I'm losing blood. So he just rips off his bandage and she is desperate. She tries, with all that she can to kind of close the wound back again and to get the bandage back. And she's like, you can't kill yourself. And he's like, but this is what I want. I want you to get out alive. And she's like, no, you can't. And she's fucking desperate. No, you can't kill yourself, I say. I'm on my knees, desperately plastering the bandage back onto his wound. Katniss, he says, it's what I want. You're not leaving me here alone, I say. Because if he dies, I'll never go home. Not really. I'll spend the rest of my life in this arena trying to think my way out. And I think that's quite interesting that when Katniss decides to do this whole berry thing, she is aware that she might die. And, she and Peeta might die. And she's willing to do it. And the hovercraft scene is one of the strongest ones. And it's one of my favorites as well. The hovercraft appears and two ladders come down. And Katniss refuses to let Peeta go, so she holds on to him and to the ladder. They are both brought inside. And when they get inside, doctors come in to take Peeta and to rush him into surgery and all that. And she goes absolutely feral, because in her mind, she kind of forgets that the games are over. And she tries to, hold on to him because she sees the doctors as threats. And she thinks that they are trying to hurt Peeta, and so she is feral and she refuses to let him go, and she almost tears his jacket off, or she does tear the jacket off, I'm not sure. Yeah, she does tear the jacket off, a piece of it, and she's left holding the fabric, and she, goes after him and she tries to get to him and they shove her back, and then a glass wall separates the two of them. And she keeps pounding on the wall and screaming for him until the moment that she just, falls down and looks. She keeps watching the surgery, basically, and she doesn't really know what's going on, but she thinks his heart stops twice. And she's just there in horror watching this whole thing and kind of not connecting that games are over in her head. And someone comes over with a glass of orange juice and she just stares at it, the clean glass with the drink in her hand that is filthy and covered in grime and all that, and hurt and all that, and she just leaves it on the floor. And she doesn't trust it. She says, I don't trust anything that clean and pretty. And so she leaves it on the floor and she doesn't drink it. You know, she is distrusting the entire road, and she is genuinely not really understanding that the games are over, because at the end of the day, the games will never really be over, you know, in the hands. What did you think of the book?
I really love it. I have another perspective reading this book as an adult, but it's too heavy for kids. All of the book is heavy, so you know you have to have the age for you to reading this book. That's all I say.
For sure.
I really love it. And
what did you rate it?
Yeah, 4.
4 out of 5?
4 out of 5.
Okay.
Out of 5.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. We can still be friends.
Okay, 5.
Peer pressure.
Peer 5.
So, I finally finished reading The Hunger Games by Susan Collins, and easiest 5 stars of my life. This last bit of the book is very emotional, and I think this time it hit harder than it ever did before, because I feel like the older I get, the more I realize how fucking young these characters are, you know, to be going through such awful things. In this last bit of the games, they are just so fucking done, you know. I think it's finally hitting them how much time they spent in the arena and all the horrors that they lived through in the arena. It's all really coming down, and you know, it gets to a point where it's hard to even fight to want to survive, because you're just so damn tired. There's this bit where Katniss literally says something along the lines of, one way or another, dead or alive, I have the feeling that I'm gonna escape the arena today. And I think that says everything about the mental state that all of them are at this point. I think it's very telling that they want this to be over so fast. They kind of don't really care whether or not they're gonna survive. It's sad. It's just sad. Then there's the whole final showdown with Kato, and that whole scene is just fucking terrifying. So gritty and disgusting and disturbing for many reasons. But something else about this scene that always stays in my memory is the mats. That's just psychological torture. Because they are just so fucking unsettling and disturbing, you know? They are not quite gross, but they are also not quite human, but they have a bit of both. And not only that, they have many characteristics that are similar to the tributes, the fallen tributes. That's unsettling in and of itself, you know, just staring at this creature that you don't quite understand, kind of uncanny valley. But also, they have the eyes of the fallen tributes and the hair and just who knows what else? These kids are already traumatized, and they are already experiencing flashbacks of the same fallen tributes whose eyes are now in these mats. And one thing that I think is worth noting about this bit is the contrast between what Peeta is concerned about versus what Katniss is concerned about. Like, Peeta is asking himself whether or not the eyes that are in the mats actually belong to the tributes, and Katniss is just worried about whether or not the brains in the mats are that of the tributes, you know, or whether or not they were altered in a way that made them hate the tributes who are still alive, you know, and want revenge and all that, or if they carried the memories. And I really like that, because it goes back to the whole thing of Katniss is always concerned about survival and about protecting herself and protecting Peeta and just making it out alive, while Peeta is always more concerned with the moral questions, you know. And he's concerned about the violation of the bodies and how these tributes, these kids, aren't respected even in death, you know. Even dead, they are still pawns in this game. Well, Katniss is like, fuck morals, fuck the others. We need to get out of here alive. We need to survive now. And I also really like the fact that it takes the two of them to bring Kato down. Like, it takes Peeta's wit, but it also takes Katniss's observation and her aim and her skill with the bow and arrow, along with his strength and his skill with wrestling. And, you know, just the quick thinking of the two of them. And then there's this bit that always gets me, which is when they are already on the hovercraft and Katniss is just watching Peeta as the doctors work on him. And she thinks back to District 12 when she used to run away to the woods, when families would bring someone injured for her mother to take care of. And she would be like, why do these people stay? They know that this person is going to die or going to go through hell. Why do they stay and watch? How do they do that? And this is what she comes up with. But I'm held here both by the hovercraft force and the same force that holds the loved ones of the dying. How often I've seen them ringed around their kitchen table, and I thought, why don't they leave? Why do they stay to watch? And now I know. It's because you have no choice. That bit always gets me, especially because it feels like she considers herself a loved one of Peeta. And literally the next line is also a very strong one, which is she's looking at Peeta and she sees this creature with hollowed out cheeks and covered in dirt and, just frightened eyes. And she's taken aback. She's a bit startled by the sight. And then she realizes that she's just staring at her own reflection and she did not recognize herself. That's a very strong scene, in my opinion. I also really love how the mutual understanding between Haymitch and Katniss evolved into this fondness that they have for each other and this genuine care, and seeing the two of them and the way Haymitch is very protective of her now just warms my heart. Like, the Captor wanted to alter her surgically without her consent and he stood up for her. The way he kind of coaches her after the games are over so that she won't get herself into even more trouble. And the first time she sees Haymitch and Neffy and Cinna, she surprises everyone, including herself, when she goes to Haymitch first and she goes to his arms first and she hugs him first. Warms my heart. It warms my heart. And I think these last 2 chapters of the book really set a tone for what Catching Fire is going to be. I think the strongest theme in this last stretch of the book is that the games are never truly over. The people in the capital all around her keep commenting on the games, and she says that her prep team talks about the games in terms of themselves. Like, they talk about the games in a way that's like where they were while that particular scene happened and what they were doing and how they felt, as if that was just some kind of soap opera or TV series, that you were watching and talking about how the scenes made you feel. Like, so fucking weird. And Katniss just has a type of restraint and compassion that I truly can never. She says that she kind of tunes out everything that they say so that she won't hate them. And I also really like how you really see all the publicity aspect of the games in this last bit. How Cinna works his hardest and Haymitch works his hardest to make Katniss just appear very innocent and naive and young looking, just an innocent girl who did something stupid for love, rather than a rebel and a rebel symbol. And I think it's worth noting that in the last events, Cinna puts Katniss in these very young outfits and he never pins the Mockingjay pin to her outfit. Because, I think we have enough rebellion as it is. Let's not attach a Mockingjay as well. And it starts really dawning on Katniss that the games are never truly over, that this is just another level of the games, and she isn't really very good at playing this specific level. When I left the arena, when the trumpets played, I was supposed to be safe from then on for the rest of my life. But if what Haymitch says is true, and he's got no reason to lie, I've never been in such a dangerous place in my life. It's so much worse than being hunted in the arena. There I could only die, end of story. But out here, Prim, my mother, Gale, the people of District 12, everyone I care about back home could be punished if I can't pull off the girl-driven crazy by love scenario Haymitch has suggested. So I still have a chance though. Funny, in the arena when I poured out those berries, I was only thinking of outsmarting the game makers, not how my actions would reflect on the Captor. But the Hunger Games are their weapon, and you are not supposed to be able to defeat it. So now the Captor will act as if they've been in control the whole time. As if they orchestrated the whole event right down to the double suicide. But that will only work if I play along with them. And Peeta will suffer too if this goes wrong. And then she starts wondering whether or not Peter's feelings are actually real, because Haymitch doesn't seem to be coaching him like he is coaching her. And that in turn leads her to start wondering about her own feelings, and, you know, she starts being very confused over what was real and what wasn't, and as well as who is she now, you know? And there's this bit that just perfectly illustrates that. I haven't even begun to separate out my feelings about Peter. It's too complicated. What he did as part of the games, as opposed to what he did out of anger at the Capitol, or because of how he would be perceived back in District 12, or simply because it was the only decent thing to do, or what he did because I cared about him. These are questions to be unraveled back home in the peace and quiet of the woods, when no one is watching, nor here with every eye upon me. And I feel so bad for her, you know, because this would be confusing in and of itself. Just navigating feelings as a teenager is very confusing, but, you know, when you spend half a month pretending to be in love with this guy, how do you tell, you know, what's real and what isn't? And on top of that, she actually began caring about him. It's very difficult to understand what was what. And when she first sees him on the stage and she hugs him very tightly and she is just thinking, do you know how much danger we're in? Do you have any idea? Also, poor Peter, you know, he is just believing this whole thing is real, and I feel so bad for him. And at this point, you really start getting a glimpse at the extent of the trauma, because Katniss is constantly having flashbacks and she is very jumpy and easily startled. And as they are watching the highlights of the games, she says that she feels like she's just watching from a distance. She's very numb and detached, and she feels like all of those things didn't really happen to her. It feels as though they happened to someone else. Just the shock that she's in right now, and how clearly she's using this as a defense mechanism. And another thing that I think this sets very well for Catching Fire is President Snow, because he literally shows up for like a second, you know, it's just a brief mention. But even as just his presence on the sidelines, you can already tell how menacing and horrifying he is. And Katniss is just in this very uncomfortable and terrifying position to be in. She was the instigator of the crime. And so even though the two of them did it, she was the one who instigated it. So the punishment is hers. And so she lives in this constant state of being watched and awaiting the sentence and awaiting the punishment. And, you know, living in Panem in general, you already feel like you're being watched and that you have to look over your shoulder all the time, as is the case, you know, in authoritarian regimes all around the world. And another thing that factors into Katniss's confusion over what she feels for Peter is the fact that while the two of them are at the Capitol, he really grounds her, he anchors her. They've been through hell together. They kind of bonded over this trauma and they saved each other's lives, and that is never going to change, you know. There is a connection there. And so while they are at the Capitol, he is familiar and he is from home and he understands what she went through. But the farther they get from the Capitol, it kind of goes both ways, because now he is just a constant reminder of the Capitol and of the games and of all the bad things they went through together. So it's a very complex situation, you know, because it's like a constant reminder of your trauma, you know. And even though he is the only person in the world who truly understands what she went through, he's also a constant reminder of it. So I definitely understand her confusion in that regard. Another thing that I briefly wanted to talk about is the few disabilities that are mentioned in this book. There is the boy from either District 9 or 10 who has a bad foot. And for me, it really just shows that having a disability doesn't factor at all into the reaping process. And it isn't really taken into account as you go to the games. It's like you're going to have to find other ways to survive. You know, if you can't count on your body, you will have to count on something else. There's also the brief mentions of two mentally disabled children. There's a boy from District 11 that I wrote talked about, the one who stole the night vision glasses. And he just told them because he thought they looked cool, and, you know, he thought it was cool. He didn't understand that he couldn't steal them, and he didn't understand the value and the importance of them, and he was killed no one really took into account the fact that he was mentally disabled and that he didn't really understand, the gravity of his actions, and he was just punished as anyone else would be. And then Katniss talks about how she can't imagine anyone doing that to Grizzy says. It's either her granddaughter or her niece, I'm not sure, who is also mentally disabled. And she talks about how everyone sees the girl as kind of a cute pet or just, a baby, and they throw her scraps and they give her goods and all that. Also not the best way to deal with a disabled person, with a mentally disabled person. But I guess I understand in a way, because the people at the scene and at the hub are less well educated, so chances are they don't really understand how to deal with disabled people, period. Then there's also Katniss's deafness, I believe she has a perforated eardrum, like a ruptured eardrum, because that's something that you can actually heal. Like, it takes a few weeks and maybe antibiotics, maybe an ear patch, but it's something that you can heal. So it makes sense for me that she could regain her hearing. But I really like the fact that while she is deaf in one ear, that really affects her. It's not just like she mentions that she's deaf and that never really plays a part, in her performance and in her survival at the games. She does say that her balance is very off and that she feels less safe, because she can't hear from both sides. So she has to be constantly looking over her shoulder, and that it isn't as easy to hunt, for example, without her hearing in both ears. So I really appreciate the fact that it actually affects her and that she has to find ways to deal with that. And finally, of course, Peter's leg. He lost his leg and he's now using a prosthetic leg. And I really appreciate how it shows that his leg is not the same. Like, he limps, he uses a cane, and he can't run properly, and sometimes he's thrown off balance. But it's also not the end of the road. He doesn't act like his life is over because he lost his leg. No, he's just glad that he's alive and he's gonna learn to live with a prosthetic leg, and that's it. And I really appreciate it. And finally, I feel so bad for Katniss. Like, her confusion, not only over her feelings for Peeta and what will be of her and Gale now, but also on how she doesn't really know who she is anymore. Like, who is she now that the games are over? Who is she now that she won't have to hunt and to get food for her family and worry about her family going hungry? Like, where does her trauma end and she begins? What is actually her and what is her trauma? How to not be defined by that trauma? Which of her feelings for Peeta are real and which are not, and what will be of Gale? And I would just like to end this by reading a few bits that I think illustrate that perfectly. And I am sorry that I'm reading so many bits. It's just that this last part of the book really gets me and I wanted to share with you. With the capital growing farther away every second, I begin to think of home, of Prim and my mother, of Gale. I excuse myself to change out of my dress and into a plain shirt and pants. As I slowly, thoroughly wash the makeup from my face and put my hair in its braid, I begin transforming back into myself, Katniss Everdeen, a girl who lives at the scene, hunts in the woods, trades in the harm. I stand in the mirror as I try to remember who I am and who I am not. By the time I join the others, the pressure of Peter's arm around my shoulders feels alien. I can't find anything to say now that we're alone. He stops to gather a bunch of wildflowers for me. When he presents them, I work very hard to look pleased, because he can know that the pink and white flowers are the tops of wild onions and only remind me of the hours I've spent gathering them with Gale. Gale. The idea of seeing Gale in a meadow of flowers makes my stomach churn. But why? I can't quite frame it in my mind. I only know that I feel like I've been lying to someone who trusts me. Or more accurately, to two people. I've been getting away with it up to this point because of the games. But there would be no games to hide behind back home. It was all for the games, Peeta says. How you acted. Not all of it, I say, tightly holding onto my flowers. Then how much? No, forget that. I guess the real question is, what's going to be left when we get home, he says. I don't know. The closer we get to District 12, the more confused I get, I say. He waits for further explanation, but none's forthcoming. Well, let me know when you work it out. he says, and the pain in his voice is palpable. And then, the bits that always get me. I want to tell him that he's not being fair. That we were strangers. That I did what it took to stay alive, to keep us both alive in the arena. That I can't explain how things are with Gale because I don't know myself. That it's no good loving me because I'm never going to get married anyway and he'd just end up hating me later instead of sooner. That if I do have feelings for him, it doesn't matter because I'll never be able to afford the kind of love that leads to a family, to children. How can he after what we've just been through? I also want to tell him how much I already miss him. But that wouldn't be fair on my part. So we just stand there, silently, watching our grimy little station rise up around us. Through the window I can see the platforms thick with cameras. Everyone would be eagerly watching a homecoming. Out of the corner of my eye, I see Peeta extend his hand. I look at him, unsure. One more time. For the audience, he says. His voice isn't angry. It's hollow, which is worse. Already the boy with the bread is slipping away from me. I take his hand, holding on tightly, preparing for the cameras, and dreading the moment when I will finally have to let go. But yeah, that's everything I have, I guess, for you today. And this book was so important for me in my formative years, you know, and they really helped me be a good person, a better person. They made me feel so validated in being angry at the face of injustice and of having this hunger for justice as well, you know. I am just really thankful for all of that. I am just really thankful for how it kind of awakened this need in me, you know, to fight for justice and to fight for equity and equality and to just learn more about the oppressions everyone faces in the world. And I am so fucking thankful for it. And, you know, it's also just a very fucking good book. I love everything about it. I love these characters. I love the plot. I love the world building. I love the themes and the political commentary and the politics, the intrigue. I think it's just genuinely very good. And I think it really accomplishes everything that I set out to do. I hope if you decided to follow this entire journey and watched all 3 vlogs that you had a good time and that you enjoyed it and that you got something from it maybe. So please let me know in the comments down below what you thought of it, if you had a good time or whatever else you want to let me know. If you want to just fangirl about the Hunger Games and its characters, I would be delighted to fangirl with you. But yeah, thank you so much for following me along on this journey. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like, comment and subscribe if you feel like it. And as always, I'll see you around.